The antiseptic burned the back of my throat, the ceiling lights felt like interrogations, and my left leg throbbed in a rhythm I couldn't outbreathe. I'm Marin Cole, 28, a structural engineer who can tell you exactly how much load a beam should carry, and yet I didn't see my night collapsing like a bad calculation on a wet road. A nurse slid a blood pressure cuff around my arm and asked me to rate the pain. The numbers in my head wouldn't line up. I said 8, then reached for my phone because I knew one number by muscle memory. My father answered on the third ring. "Marin, not now," he said, voice tight, like a door that never closes without a slam. Rain's melting down. The interview, she's in pieces. I'm in the emergency room, I told him, tasting copper. Airbag, chest pain, leg might be broken. There was a stretch of sound where I could hear his television and someone else's laughter. "You're not dying," he said. "I can't abandon your sister when she's like this. Don't be dramatic." The call ended with a click that echoed louder than the heart monitor. The nurse tucked a thin blanket over my knees, her eyes soft the way people look at a car stranded on black ice. She asked who my emergency contact was. I stared at the field on the clipboard and realized the name I'd always written didn't fit anymore. A paramedic rolled past with a gurney and a gray-haired man who kept asking for his wife. Somewhere down the hall, a child cried like a fire alarm that never quits. I pressed my phone to my sternum and listened to the beeps line up with my breath. If he wouldn't come, I would have to call someone who would, and not for comfort, for backup. The first scan came back hazy, a blur of ribs and shadows. A doctor with tired eyes explained that they needed more imaging, maybe a CT, to rule out internal bleeding. He spoke calmly, like a man who had seen too many bodies meet steel and glass. I nodded, even though every movement sent pain shooting through my chest. They wheeled me down a hallway that smelled of disinfectant and burnt coffee. My gown gaped open at the back, and for the first time that night, I felt small in a way that had nothing to do with broken bones. On the ride back to the curtained bay, I scrolled through my cracked screen, every swipe slow because of the IV taped to my hand. Text after text from Rain lit up the display, her words spilling like she'd been handed my lifeline instead of me. "Dad says you're fine. Why would you try to steal his attention when you know I'm spiraling? I need him more." Another ping. "You've always been jealous." I wanted to laugh, but the laugh stuck against my bruised ribs. Even bleeding in an ER, I was still cast as the selfish one. The nurse returned, checked the monitor, and offered ice chips. "Anyone on the way?" she asked. I opened my mouth, then shut it again. My father's voice replayed cold and clipped. I swallowed the ice like a secret and whispered, "Not yet." She didn't press, just squeezed my hand once before leaving me in the steady hum of machines. The room filled with memories I hadn't invited, birthdays with paper plates while Rain had balloons tied to every chair, graduation skipped because her tears carried more weight than my milestones. I had carried that pattern like a second spine, never breaking until steel and glass forced it. My chest ached, but the sharper wound was realizing that maybe I had never been seen at all. When the curtain shifted with a draft from the hallway, I kept waiting for my father's shoes to appear beneath it. They never did. Instead, my phone buzzed again, and I finally understood something I should have learned years ago. His absence wasn't temporary. It was the rule. They kept me under the fluorescent lights while the CT scanner hummed somewhere behind a set of double doors. I could feel the weight of the blanket over my legs, but not much else. When the nurse leaned in and asked if I could wiggle my toes, I managed the slightest twitch. She smiled like it was good news, but her eyes betrayed caution. "We'll keep you stable until the doctor reviews the images," she said, scribbling something on her chart before leaving me alone again. I turned my head toward the monitor, its steady beeping the only rhythm I could rely on. My phone rested on the tray table beside me. The screen fractured like a spiderweb. Notifications pulsed across it. Rain again. "Dad's with me. Stop trying to make everything about you." Another one scrolled up. "If you cared about family, you wouldn't dump your drama on him when I need him." The words blurred, but the sting of them cut sharper than the IV needle in my arm. I let the phone slip from my hand, hitting the thin mattress with a dull sound. My chest rose shallow and shaky as memories broke loose without permission. 15th birthday, a store-bought cake, one candle. My father rushing out halfway through dinner because Rain had locked herself in the bathroom. High school graduation, my row marched onto the stage while his seat stayed empty. A text later, apologizing that Rain had a panic attack over a final grade. Each time I had told myself it was fine that she needed him more, that being strong was my role. But lying there with bruises blooming purple and blue, I finally admitted what I'd never dared to say aloud. Being strong had only ever meant being invisible. The curtain rustled. A nurse's aide slipped in to adjust my IV and glanced at the empty chair in the corner. "Family on their way?" she asked softly. I hesitated, then muttered, "Not tonight." She gave me a look that wasn't pity, exactly, more like quiet recognition before slipping back out. The chair stayed empty. The beeping carried on. And inside that hollow sound, I realized I was done waiting for footsteps that were never coming. The hours blurred together, measured only by the drip of saline and the shuffle of rubber soles outside my curtain. When the doctor finally returned, he said the scans showed no internal bleeding, but a fractured rib and a leg that needed immobilization. "You'll be sore for weeks," he explained, "but you're lucky. Lucky." I let the words settle in the sterile air. Lucky to be alone on an emergency table while my father comforted Rain over a rejection email. After he left, I picked up my phone again. My thumb hovered over my father's name, but I couldn't make myself press it. I knew exactly what he would say. Some mix of annoyance and dismissal, as though surviving a crash was an inconvenience compared to managing my sister's emotions. My chest tightened more from anger than pain, and I scrolled past his number. That's when another name caught me, Avery Park, the lawyer who had once helped me sort out a lease dispute years ago. Calm, steady, no judgment. My finger trembled, then tapped. She answered on the second ring. "Marin, are you safe?" Her voice cut through the static of machines. "Physically, yes," I whispered. "But I need more than stitches. I need help, legal help." The words came out harsher than I intended. But once they were in the air, I couldn't take them back. I told her everything, the accident, the call, the years of bailing out Rain's debts, co-signing her car loan, covering rent, the endless cycle of giving until I had nothing left for myself. Avery didn't interrupt. She just listened, the silence on her end heavier than any lecture I'd ever gotten from my father. When I finished, she said simply, "What do you want to do?" The answer rose before doubt could smother it. I want out. I want every tie cut. Power of attorney, beneficiaries, access to my accounts. All of it. There was no hesitation in her reply. "Then we'll start tomorrow. I'll come to the hospital with the paperwork. You won't go through this alone." For the first time that night, I let my head sink into the pillow, without fear that no one was on my side. The monitor beeped steady and sure, like it finally had a rhythm I could trust. By late afternoon the following day, the hospital room felt more like a waiting station than a place of healing. The blinds filtered weak strips of light onto the floor, and the television mounted in the corner hummed with a cooking show I wasn't really watching. I kept checking the clock, not for my father, but for Avery. She had promised to stop by with the first round of paperwork. Just knowing someone was coming steadied me in a way morphine never could. At 4:47, the door swung open, but it wasn't Avery. My father stepped in first, his tie loose like he'd rushed over or wanted it to look that way. Rain trailed behind him, oversized sunglasses pushed up into her hair, her expression hovering between wounded pride and irritation. For a second, I almost convinced myself they were here out of concern. Then my father's eyes landed on the IV in my arm, and instead of worry, I saw annoyance. "Is this really necessary, Marin?" he asked, voice sharp. "You've always had a flair for turning small things into crises. Your sister needed me yesterday, and you're sulking because I couldn't be in two places at once." I sat up slowly, pain radiating through my side, but I didn't look away. "A car crash isn't a tantrum, Dad. I was alone on a gurney while you were talking her through a job rejection." Rain gasped. "You're so self-centered." "I was having a panic attack. Do you have any idea what that feels like?" Before I could answer, another figure entered. Avery, crisp navy suit, briefcase in hand, eyes steady. She crossed to my bedside and introduced herself. I'm Avery Park Marin's attorney. The word attorney seemed to suck all the oxygen from the room. My father's jaw clenched. Rain scoffed, arms crossed. An attorney. This is insane. Avery laid a folder on the tray table. As of today, Marin has revoked any prior financial authorizations connected to her accounts or estate. Going forward, all requests must go through me. Her tone was calm, professional, but the weight of it landed like a gavel. My father snatched the papers, scanning the legal language with a scowl. You can't be serious. After everything I've done for you, braces, summer camps, you owe this family. The words struck hot, but I held his stare. No, I've paid my dues. And I'm done being the safety net for Rain's freefall. The room went silent, thick with disbelief. For the first time, I didn't flinch from it. 2 days later, I was back in my apartment, the plaster brace heavy on my leg, the air thick with the smell of disinfectant wipes I'd used to scrub down the counters. The silence was almost comforting until my phone lit up again. This time it wasn't Rain's frantic texts, but a Facebook post from my father. Sometimes the people you sacrifice most for are the ones who forget where they came from. Dozens of relatives chimed in with sympathy, cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, dropping little heart emojis, and aunt commenting, "Loyalty is everything." My chest tightened, not from broken ribs, but from the familiar sting of being cast as the villain. I didn't reply. Avery had been clear, silence was power. Still, the notifications stacked like bricks on my chest. Then a knock at the door cut through the digital noise. When I opened it, Nora stood there with a grocery bag balanced on one hip. She dropped it on the counter without ceremony. Soup, electrolyte drinks, and rotisserie chicken. "Don't argue," she said, already putting things in my fridge. I hadn't realized how empty it was until she filled it. Later that evening, another knock. Mrs. Klein from downstairs appeared, holding a bundle of pansies from her garden. "Brightens up a room," she said, placing them carefully on the table beside my crutches. Her kindness was quiet, but it hit deeper than any Facebook thread. She didn't ask what had happened. She didn't need to. When I checked my phone again, a new message waited, not from family, but from my cousin Caleb, the one who'd stayed silent under Dad's post. I saw what he wrote. "For what it's worth, I believe you." I remember how it always was. Rain was the storm, and you were expected to be the umbrella. My vision blurred as I read it, not from painkillers, but from the sudden relief of being seen. I set the phone down and let the apartment stay quiet. For the first time in days, the silence didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like proof that the right people knew the truth without me having to shout it. The following week, I hobbled into Avery's office on crutches, the sharp scent of fresh coffee mixing with printer toner. The conference room was small but neat, a single window framing downtown traffic below. Avery slid a stack of folders across the table, each tabbed and labeled in her meticulous handwriting. "I've organized the records you sent," she said. "Transfers, co-signed loans, recurring payments. It's all here." I stared at the numbers. 5 years of covering Rain's car payments, rent checks, even credit card bills, that had ballooned out of nowhere. Almost 6 figures in total. The sight of it made my stomach twist. That money could have cleared my student loans, built a down payment, or at least secured me the safety net I never had. Instead, it was gone, siphoned drip by drip in the name of keeping the family together. Avery's voice steadied me. "This isn't generosity, it's dependence, and it's time to reclaim what's yours." She guided me through the documents, revoking the power of attorney I'd signed in college, just in case, removing my father and Rain as beneficiaries from my retirement plan, and insurance, updating access to all my bank accounts. Each signature felt like a nail sealing off a part of my past, painful but necessary. When we reached the co-signed loan, Avery leaned back. Rain's missed enough payments to trigger a refinance option. If she can't take full responsibility, the car may have to be sold. I imagined her outrage, her tears, my father's anger. For a moment, guilt flickered. Then I remembered the sound of his voice dismissing my accident as drama. I pressed the pen to paper. "Do it," I said. My hand shook, but not from hesitation. By the end of the hour, the folders were lighter, my chest heavier. grief tangled with relief, like cutting free from a rope that had left burns in the skin. Avery gathered the documents, her expression firm but kind. "You've drawn the line," she said. "Now the hard part is keeping it." I left the office slower than I'd entered, but every step on those crutches felt like forward motion, a path I had chosen for myself at last. The air outside my apartment carried the sting of late October, crisp enough to fog my breath as I maneuvered my crutches down the walkway. I spotted him before he saw me. My father leaning against his truck, arms folded like he'd been waiting for hours. Rain sat in the passenger seat, sunglasses hiding most of her face, though the restless tapping of her fingers on the dashboard gave her away. My stomach nodded, but I kept moving. Nora had insisted on walking me down, and I caught her reflection in the glass door, hovering just inside the lobby. A witness silent and steady. Marin, my father, called out as I reached the curb. His voice tried for soft, but cracked on the edges. "Can we talk just us?" He gestured for Rain to stay in the car, but she leaned forward anyway, lips pressed tight. I balanced on the crutches, the ache in my ribs flaring with every breath. "Say what you need to say." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I know you're angry, but dragging lawyers into this, after everything I've done for you, raising you, paying for braces, keeping a roof over your head, you repay me by cutting us off. Your sister is drowning Marin. She needs you." I felt the heat rise behind my eyes, but I didn't let it spill. I've been her life raft for years. Every loan, every bill, every crisis. I was bleeding in an ER, Dad, and you still chose her panic over my broken bones. That's not parenting. That's using me because I don't complain. Rain's window slid down with a squeak. "You make it sound like I asked for all of this. You've always hated me for needing more." I turned toward her. Needing more is one thing. Expecting me to bleed for it every time is another. My voice shook, but it was steady enough to make her flinch. My father's face hardened, the old anger flashing through. "Family sacrifices, Marin. That's the way it works." I tightened my grip on the crutches. Sacrifice is a choice. What you've demanded from me was servitude, and I'm done. Behind me, I heard the lobby door open. Nora's presence like a reminder I wasn't standing alone. My father looked from me to her, then back again, but whatever words he'd loaded died on his tongue. He climbed into the truck. Rain's eyes lingered on me, glassy but unrepentant, before the engine roared to life. I watched them drive away, the taillights shrinking into the dark, and felt the cold bite, sharper on my skin, but inside, a heaviness finally began to lift. Physical therapy started with small humiliations, raising my arms while the technician counted bending my knee against resistance bands, learning how to breathe deep without wincing. Lisa, the therapist assigned to me, was patient but firm. "Pain is expected. Progress is measured by what you can do despite it," she said, guiding my ribcage with careful hands. Each repetition felt like a reminder that healing wasn't passive. It demanded participation even when I wanted nothing more than to curl back into bed. By the second week, I was strong enough to climb a few stairs with crutches. That's when Nora insisted on taking me out. Real food. Real air. No arguments, she said, steering me into her car before I could protest. We ended up at a diner with peeling vinyl booths and a bell that jingled over the door. The place smelled of butter and coffee, the kind of ordinary comfort I hadn't realized I missed. Eli, the waiter, barely older than us, scribbled our order: grilled cheese and tomato soup for Nora, chicken pot pie for me, water for both. He brought the soup first, setting the bowl down with a quiet clink. The steam fogged Nora's glasses, making her laugh. When my pot pie arrived, the crust golden and bubbling, I felt something I hadn't in weeks: hunger. Not just for food, but for life beyond survival. As we ate, Nora talked about work deadlines and office gossip, nothing heavy, nothing laced with judgment. She didn't ask about my father or Rain. She just let the space fill with normalcy. When the check came, I reached for it, my hand shaking less than it had in days. "I've got mine," I insisted. She tipped generously, anyway, sliding a 20 under the mug. Later that evening, back in my apartment, I found a photo from Mrs. Klein slipped under my door, a picture of her garden pansies in full bloom with a note that said, "Healing takes seasons." I pinned it to my fridge. For the first time in a long while, the quiet of my home felt like shelter instead of exile. Nights grew quieter once I changed the locks on my phone as much as my door. Avery filed the last of the paperwork confirming my father and Rain were no longer tied to my accounts or my name. She emailed me copies, her subject line simple, "You're free." I read it 3 times before letting the truth sink in. Freedom didn't feel triumphant the way I thought it would. It felt steady, like ground that had always been beneath me, but I'd never dared to stand on. One evening, I sat at the kitchen table with my crutches leaning against the wall, the only light a lamp glowing over a chipped mug of tea. I opened my phone and updated my emergency contacts. Nora first, Mrs. Klein second, both of them already aware and willing. The act was small, a few taps on a screen, but it rewrote the story of who I could rely on. No longer a family tree dictated by blood, but a circle chosen by trust. I walked limped really into the bathroom and caught my reflection in the mirror. The bruises had faded into yellow smudges. The stitches were nearly gone, but a thin scar traced along my leg. I touched it gently, not with shame, but recognition. Proof that I had survived not only the crash, but the years of being unseen. My father never called again. Rain never apologized. Their silence once would have gutted me. Now it only confirmed what I had already decided: absence can sometimes be the most honest form of presence. As I turned off the kitchen light, the apartment settled into stillness, but it was no longer hostile. The walls didn't echo with abandonment. They breathed with me, steady and sure. For the first time, silence was not an accusation. It was peace. If anyone asked me what I'd learned, I'd tell them this family isn't who shares your last name, it's who shows up when you can't stand on your own. Love doesn't demand your suffering as proof. You don't have to bleed to be worthy. And the day you stop begging to be seen is the day you finally begin to heal. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.